Sure, I'm live. Okay. Good evening, folks. Um, I'm Doug Latimer with the Alpine Club of Canada, and this is an introduction to avalanche safety. Just going to keep my phone on as a backup. Sometimes I need to put in a code. Okay. So if those of you who are currently streaming, would you be so kind as to let me know that you're picking up the video and the audio signal? You can use the chat. Okay. Looks like it's working at my end. How are you doing, folks? Great, thanks, Paul. So a few minutes early. I'll just wait a couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, happy to chat with you and answer them as best I can. And then we'll get started. I put together a little video that I want to show just in response to the fatality that happened last weekend. Unfortunately, we've had our first fatality for the season, and it was in K Country with, again, regrettably, fairly young group of climbers, 2 people. One of them didn't survive, and he was an apprentice guide. Right. So we seem to be getting some people coming in. Another minute or so, and we'll get started. Anybody tuning in from far away? A few years ago, I had somebody from Hawaii. I was very jealous. Just about there. Vancouver. Oh, that's a lovely city. We suspect that's where our son's going to want to end up when he finishes university. Okay. So it's 7 o'clock, and I'll get started. So thanks for showing up, folks. My name is Doug Latimer, and I'm the lead guide for the Alpine Club of Canada. Throughout this winter, we'll be running avalanche skills training courses, guiding programs along the Wapta and Yoho Traverse, crevasse rescue, some ski programs in the Glacier National Park out of the Wheeler Hut, and various programs. If you're interested, by all means, please check us out. Oh, Colorado, nice. I think we have a Squamish. Oh, now I'm jealous again. So I won't get too far off track here. There is a bit of a delay, so it might be a minute or two before I see everyone's response. So if you do put in a chat, I'll check regularly. Is my audio not loud enough? I can crank it up. How's that? I've turned it up, and I'll move a little bit closer. All right. So once again, welcome. And as I was mentioning, we've just had the first fatality for the season, which is quite regrettable. And it's very easy to look at something like an accident and sort of say, you know, what they did wrong, or, you know, how this shouldn't have happened. And I'm not guilty of it either. I look at situations and I make calls too, but I try to learn from them. And the situation this weekend was a really tough one because the individuals involved were well experienced, well trained. It was an apprentice guide and I believe a friend on their day off. They went to do an ice climb, and on the descent, the slopes above them released, and they were caught and pushed into a terrain trap where they were buried fairly deep. And unfortunately, only one of them survived. The hazard on that day was considerable in the Alpine, and because it was so recent, I can remember the weather and the winds were really starting to pick up. Probably a lot of transport, wind slab, and K Country is famous for big winds. I remember asking Mike Copang, who's one of the search and rescue technicians or park rangers for Kananaskis, what he always considered that made Kananaskis sort of unique from other regions, and he didn't even hesitate. He just said winds. They can get winds up to 100 kilometers an hour on average once a month. So it's a very windy place, and just from personal experience, the winds can change direction. So it's really difficult to figure out sometimes which slopes are getting loaded, which slopes are getting scoured. And while these two were climbing, the winds were fairly strong. It's not the really big winds that tend to produce the greatest concerns for transporting snow and producing wind slabs. It's the moderate winds, about 50 to, actually it's about 30 to 60 kilometers an hour. And you know, at 30 kilometers, it's really just a nice breeze. And at 50, 60 kilometers, it's starting to get the flags to snap, but it's not that bad. So be careful. The really strong winds tend to move the snow quite a ways, and a lot of it will actually sublimate, go back into a gas, and not reach the ground. And so it's not always that obvious, especially if you're in a sheltered feature. The slopes above are loading. They didn't go through the start zone. They just happened to be unlucky. They had bad luck. And you know, that's a really tough one, because I think back to, I used to do a lot of ice climbing, and 30 years ago, would I have done that? And I'm not sure. I very well might have. It's difficult. They were never in the start zone. Where's the breaking point? And I think the biggest challenge I have with winter travel is that the avalanche hazard sometimes is beautiful. It's very black and white. You know it's good, you know it's bad. But unfortunately, especially if you live away from the coast and you get into the Columbias and the Rocky Mountains, it's almost always a shade of gray. And I just put together a little video to show you what I mean. So you've been looking at this, I'm going to play it. So this is last year I did a ski traverse guiding for the ACC, and we did the Bodie Yoho traverse. And this is supposed to play. There we go. So basically on this map, this is the tour from the Guy Hut over Isolated Call and down to the Stanley Mitchell Hut. You're going over quite a bit of avalanche terrain. You leave early in the day, so it's nice and cold, and we basically ski down to the valley between the two features at sunrise, and it was gorgeous. But we skied down, the glacier was still fairly dark. That's looking back at the hut. You can see the marker there. And earlier on, we're going up the Isolated Call. This is a classic avalanche feature. That's big, that's steep, and there's no escape. The ridge, for the most part, is too steep to work up, but there are a couple of places, and I did leave the defined track to get up on this bench, as you can see in the tracks there, because it gave us a safe rest. And then on the last stretch, basically, we were fit, we had a rest, we moved quickly, we got out over top. But last year was a sketchy year, and I really wasn't sure if we were going to try this route or not. Looking across, that's the president and vice president, and the next day, we would be skiing that. We were on top by 9:30, 10 a.m. because I didn't want this slope to warm up for fear of avalanches. And we got down pretty fast. It was still cold, it was still stable. And we were at the hut by 11 a.m. Pulled the mattresses out, the sleeping pads, and basically just laid in the sun and suntanned for a good chunk of the day. Got in a lap or two. The next morning, we're up early, and this was about as good as the weather got in the morning. And we decided to take a look about skiing the call between the president and the vice president. When I'd left, the hazard in the Alpine had been considerable. And the main concern was, well, there were two concerns, was the deep, weak base, and the other was that we had a new storm cycle and it wasn't bonding well to the old snow. So that tends to be a fairly short-term problem. But I was seeing a lot of recent avalanche activity from that. And so as we go up here, I really hadn't committed. And I told my group, we'll go take a look. We make no promises. In the end, we made it up. We got up to the col, and it started to clear up. And we had literally about 1,000-meter ski descent. And this, without a doubt, was the best ski I'd done in the last 2 years, despite being a bad year. But it was a really tough decision to make. And I still think it was the right decision. But you know, it wasn't easy because we had a weak base, and then we have this problem closer to the surface. And as I'd looked through the landscape, I'd seen a lot of recent avalanches that had come right after the start of the storm cycle, but I'd seen nothing that had happened in the last 4 or 5 days. I also didn't have access to get more information on what other people were seeing for avalanche hazard. So before I committed to that, I went and did a little peek. And on a 40-degree slope up on the ridge, this is what I got. And if you saw that fracture in the snow and you have some training, you actually know that that fracture tells you shooting cracks are a big warning sign. And they are. And you should heed them. The reason I looked at that and I actually thought, that's not so bad, is because that was a steep slope. It was 40 degrees. 35 to 40 degrees is the prime slope for an avalanche. There was nothing below that slope to help hold it together, so the only reason it didn't fail was because that weak layer was bonding, and it helped support the other information I had. I had done some snow tests. Don't bet your life on a few snow tests, but they gave me the same information, and that crack had some stress in it, but it didn't propagate, it didn't release. And when I combined all that information together, I figured it was reasonable to make the push up isolated col, and the next day, it hadn't snowed, there was very little wind. I figured we were still in a relatively safe situation right up until it warmed up to the point where the snowpack would weaken. I think that was the right decision, but the problem with snow safety is you're never 100% sure, because it's not like you write a test, you hand it in and you get your marks back. There's no immediate feedback. Did you make the right decision or did you just get lucky? If you made the right decision, fantastic. You're good at what you do. If you get lucky, you're probably going to interpret that as, well, I made the right decision, so I can keep pushing it at that level. And the truth is, you can't. But avalanches are weather-based phenomena. And weather is based on the chaos theory. And so often when we forecast, we get it right. But you know what? It's never 100%. And every once in a while, it's just flat out wrong. It's rare, but it does happen. And if that's wrong, then the information contained in the snow, those layers and those weak layers and how they're bonding, can also be wrong. Twice in my life, working as a guide, I have skied slopes, small test features that I was comfortable working on because the consequences were minimal, but the information we gather would be really useful. And in those situations, there was twice when the slope didn't fail that everybody thought it should. And once it made no sense because everywhere else we touched the slopes, they released. And this one slope, tickled it on the edge, nothing happened. Second guide came in, was a bit bolder, pounded it, nothing happened. I stepped into the middle, skied it, nothing happened. Every other slope we approached released, but that one. We couldn't figure it out. To this day, I don't know why. And I remember years ago, I was working in the Purcells, and I was in Purcell Lodge, and I was the lead guide at the time. We had a classic layout of a weak layer in the snowpack, big storm cycle, heavy wind. We're in for a major avalanche cycle. We all knew it. We landed the helicopter, somehow it got in and took off before the storm got any worse, and then we were pounded for 2 days. And during those 2 days, we saw no evidence of avalanche activity. Afterwards, we saw no evidence when the skies cleared of recent activity. And yet, as we went through the landscape, we got easy results on our tests. We were getting whoops and radiating cracks everywhere, but nothing ever slid. And I was scared. I was required by the standards that we work to to call the hazard considerable because I didn't see widespread avalanche activity. And I did. But I also told my guides, and no one argued with this, I know we're calling it considerable, but we're all treating it like it's high because it should be. And that night I got an email. We had internet access. And it was a request from Avalanche Canada, who writes the Avalanche bulletins. And they were saying, what are you guys seeing out there in the Purcells? Because we're getting some mixed messages. And I knew the manager, and I wrote back to him and said, hey, Carl, I've never seen this before. Every fiber in my body says it's high. But you know what? We're calling it considerable because we're seeing no activity. But we're treating it like it's high. And he wrote back to me and said, thanks, Doug. I'm hearing a lot of that. And so they adjusted their bulletin. They actually increased it because it's so easy to get lulled into a false sense of confidence when you see the hazards only down to considerable, or you're not getting releases. We're scared. We're really scared. And so we made that movement. And this was a situation where I actually had some evidence, recent avalanche activity and that one shooting crack, that gave me an indication that things were actually pretty touchy. But over the course of several days, as I gathered information, I also got this overwhelming body that said, overall, things are actually pretty stable. And in the end, I chose that. It's tough. It's really tough to figure out when things are safe and when they're unstable. And so my best advice to you is if you're ever in a situation where you're not sure, always err on the side of caution. Because you know what? You can come back and you can do it again. But if you're wrong, you may not get a second chance, and you only get to play with the dice so often. All right. So, while I get started, just had a chance to look. Colorado, cool. Squamish, nice. Ucluelet, we were there this summer. I love that area. So great. Glad to see people are coming in from a wide area. There we go. So I'm just going to use my ebook. I produced this in 2018, I think, for teaching avalanche safety, and we do sell it online, but it's a really nice tool for virtual programs. So let's take a look at this. I'm not going to run this video, or I'm going to run this video, but not the audio. It's an old video, the audio is not so good. But this is an individual skiing over Alaska. See how we can't quite see the bottom? And as soon as he gets a clear view, it triggers the So this is all in real time. I was given permission to use the footage, and the only thing I've done is basically superimposed data over top of the footage. So now he's fully buried. The interesting thing is he's not actually fully buried. Both of his hands are sticking out of the snow, and yet he's unable to free himself. And at first this might not make much sense, but in fact he put his ski pole straps on before he went down, and now his poles are buried and he is literally handcuffed into the snowbank. When my son was 4, I took him up to Purcell Lodge because my spouse and I were managing the facility, and he loved it there for the next 3 years that we kind of worked with the place. We'd bring him up as much as we could, and he'd spend time there in the winter and the summer, and I convinced him never wear ski pole straps, which took 2 years to convince. We started skiing on the hill or going at the Nordic side. But this is the survival time for full burial in Switzerland. All right, so you have about a 50-50 chance, just under half an hour. still being alive. Canada, it's a totally different beast. Right? So you have about a 50% chance of survival after 12 minutes. We have very low survival rates because we have a different survival than the Swiss. We also ski different terrain. If you're out on the coast, your survival times tend to be actually less because burials are usually with much denser, heavier snow. And basically what happens is it literally crushes the life out of you. We tend to have better survival rates similar to the Swiss when we get into the Columbia Mountains. And in the Rockies, we also have a lower survival rate based on time because... I thought I turned that off. Okay, try that. Thank you. So you have a much lower survival time in the Rockies, in part because of trauma. And there was a very interesting study done back in 2014 to show this. The other thing that the study was really good for is it showed that while we have shorter survival times, we have the same survival rate as the Swiss. And that's because Canadians do their own rescues. In Switzerland, they call for help. And because we get people out sooner, we have increased number of people who basically with self-rescue survive, and it averages things out. Okay, so thanks guys. I have killed the one input for the sound. Okay, now you just wait. So the individual survived, and I don't believe he was seriously injured. But this is about the fastest you can ever hope for a rescue. I wish I could put the other audio on because you can hear him gasping for air. All right. Colors are changing. Seeing more daylight, they're digging down to them. You can hear the rescuers on the surface. We're almost there. Seems to take forever, doesn't it? Yet it's only 4 minutes. And finally, they've got him out. You can actually see his hands sticking out. So you don't want to be in that situation. An avalanche, while they can be difficult, is not a random event. It's not an act of God. And for the most part, it's not bad luck. 90% of all avalanche victims for skiing and other events triggered the avalanche that they were involved with. So chances are you or someone in your party will trigger the slide if you get caught. You need 4 things for an avalanche, and this is good because we can track those. And this is how we do avalanche forecasts. We look at the snow, we look at the slope, we look for a weak layer within the snow, and we look for a trigger. You've got to have those 4 ingredients or you don't have an avalanche. So it's actually pretty simple. Okay, so technically an avalanche can be any material coming down a slope, but snow avalanches are unique in that they have distinct properties. So everything I'm talking about is snow. It's not ice, it's not water, it's not gravel, it's strictly snow. It's its own beast. And without snow, there's no risk of an avalanche. So you can use this to your advantage. You can use terrain that's been windswept and has very thin features, like on a ridge, where there's really no consequences. Everything will slide off on one side or the other. Once you get, basically we say about 30 centimeters of snow, which is, if you're wearing a ski boot and you're basically your foot's hitting the ground, or your skis are, it's about calf height. That's what it is on me, and I'm fairly tall. Once it starts getting higher than that from the ground, you should start thinking that, yeah, avalanches are possible. We've reached critical mass. So you've got to have snow. But you know what? No one has ever died from an avalanche on the flats or plains of Manitoba. You got to have a slope. All right, so this is actually Foyt's Ridge in Golden. So if your skiing slope's under 25 degrees, it's very safe. It's possible, but very low likely. 25 to 30, it's possible, but unlikely. 30 to 45 degrees is classic avalanche terrain. 35 to 40 is the Dragon's Jaws. Guess what slope angles you really want to ski when you have a powder day? 35 to 40 is the optimal slope angle for powder skiing. Not because you want the speed, but because if the angle is less than 30, if you've got deep powder, you can point your ski straight down and you won't move. And once you get past 30 and up towards 35, you start picking up a little speed. And at 35 to 40, you get enough speed that you start to sort of water ski on top of some of it, and you're just having the time of your life. And so this is for strong intermediate skiers or better. My general rule of thumb is if you're really enjoying yourself, you're just loving this line for the slope, it's an avalanche slope. If you're skiing the line and you're thinking, well, okay, it's fun, but it's nothing special to write home about, you're probably at 30 degrees or less. They can be fun. They can be great. But it's not that sort of adrenaline exhilaration you get going down a big powder line. So that's my rule of thumb, but it doesn't often work. Because you know what? This year, just about anywhere you can ski is going to be fun. And so my advice is always carry a slope meter. And the cheapest slope meter you can get is your phone. All right? You can measure slope angles with your smartphone, and some of these apps are free. The more expensive ones cost $2, and they're actually pretty good. They've got some avalanche information because they're specific for it. But that's all you need, and use it. Take your ski pole, lay it on the slope, and then measure it. Do this in the trees or right along the edge of the slope, so you're not standing in the middle of the feature thinking, well, how is it? Oh, geez, I really shouldn't be here. It's too late. But if you're on the tree, on the edge with the trees, or on lower angle terrain, you can eyeball it as well, but use a slope meter. I remember years ago I had a group out, and we had a really touchy snowpack. It was beautiful snow, sitting on ball bearings, and we're hooped. And I spent 5 days tiptoeing with my group, skiing very low angled lines, which were not a lot of fun because it wasn't steep enough. And we skied a lot of trees because trees are anchors. But you know what? There's nothing like skiing a big open line. And finally, after 3 or 4 days, I came across that perfect slope. Looked like 20, 25 degrees, untouched by the wind, not a single track on it. I was like, yes, finally, I can give them a great line and we're going to have fun. And just as a matter of practice, because it was early in the year, I put my ski pole out as soon as I left the trees, put my slope meter on it, and guess what? It was about 38 degrees. It was exactly the slope I don't want to go near. But I really wanted to ski it. I was sick of the trees, and I knew we couldn't move in low-angled terrain. So now my brain has effectively told me it's a low-angled slope. So use your tools, because we get sucked in by our brains, and that can be quite dangerous. So as soon as I saw that slope angle, I backed up and told my group, oh, it's horrible. There's this sun crust on there and I can feel wind slab underneath. Let's go ski the trees. They haven't had the wind or the sun yet. We'll have so much more fun. What can you do? But check yourself. Gather information. Don't make assumptions. There's also different shapes of slopes. I'm sure that's not rocket science, but hey, if it's straight, we call it planar. If it starts steep and goes shallow, we call it concave. And if it's got a steep roll, it's convex. Remember the beginning of the video where the skier gets buried? He was skiing towards a convex roll. How do you know you have a convex roll on your slope? You can't see the bottom. And as soon as you can look over that roll and see the bottom, guess what? You're standing on the snow that's under tension, which means you're on the trigger point. And if it doesn't fail there, good, because that's where it's most likely to occur. In avalanche accidents in Canada from 1996 to 2007, we have not updated the data yet. We do have it, it's under the works, but it's not out yet. From 96 to 2007, 1/3 of all avalanche fatalities in Canada initiated when the skier or the snowmobiler or the sledder, or the boarder basically skied over the steep section on a convex roll. They're classic trigger points. All things being equal, the convex roll is the most dangerous. Number 2 is the planar. Number 3 is the concave slope. It tends to compress into itself, makes it a bit stronger. It's still avalanches, but it avalanches less frequently. Okay? If the planar slope is just hanging off a steep slope or a cliff, it's also really touchy. And it adds the other problem that if it fails, even if it's a small one, it knocks you off your feet and then you go whipping off a cliff and you die from the trauma of the landing. This happened, it's been a few years now, by a skier I was following. He was doing a lot of tours that I had done, and I was really impressed that he was doing them so early in the winter season. And then he went up to ski the north face of Mount Victoria. And on the descent, he hit a small pocket of wind slab, just an unstable snow. It released, knocked him off his feet. It was no big deal, but he was close to the edge and he was going so fast he could never recover and got swept off and took over 100 meters of air before he hit the glacier below. So be careful of your slopes. So you got to have snow, you got to have a slope. Okay, what's next? You need a weak layer. Weak layers are people are still writing their master's thesis and doing their PhDs on snow analysis and weak layers within the snowpack, their behavior, how they react, how they don't react. And that's good because we learn from them. But you know what? At the recreational level, and to be perfectly honest, even at the professional level, even though I teach technicians and people who will be becoming avalanche forecasters now, I don't focus on the weak layer that much. And the reason I don't is because a weak layer is a weak layer is a weak layer. Okay? It doesn't matter what it is when you're standing there. If you've got a weak layer, you've got a problem. All right? No one's gonna, stand there at my funeral and say, well, Doug got killed on wind slab. He really should have known better. As opposed to, well, Doug bought it on the deep, persistent basal facets. Who could have saw that coming? Well, no, it's a weak layer. And we knew they're both there. A weak layer is a weak layer is a weak layer. Don't get into trying to analyze it and decide, is it one you can play with? Bad is bad. Short-term instabilities, we often talk about storm snow or wind slab. Storm snow is new snow piling up from the storm. Wind slab is when, this is what happened over the weekend, the wind actually blows the snow up and over the mountain and deposits it on the shallow side. And that creates basically a much stiffer, denser type of snow. I can show you actually. Let's take a look. Snow crystals, wind. I'm going to turn the audio off so we don't have that whole problem. This is how wind slab is formed. So as the wind blows, it just redistributes snow. This is a time lapse up on the WAPTA. This process is called saltation. But the truth is, as the snow is blowing along the surface at that 25 to 60 kilometers an hour, the snowflakes are literally getting broken up into tiny little shards of ice. And then they fall over into the sheltered side and they pack. And they can become very, very dense snow. It can also be fairly soft, but it does have a stiff quality to it. And then, you can't hear this because I have the audio off, but when you walk on it, it's got a really stiff styrofoam-like sound to it sometimes. And that's wind slab. So, wind slab is a weak layer. And there's a whole bunch of them. Some of them form after the storm because the snow is changing, it's metamorphosing. From the bottom up it can rot. In the middle we can have a weak layer because it's got a crust or frost, we call that surface hoar, and then new storm snow on top. So it's pretty complicated. But at the end of the day, just keep it simple. And this is how I think, because it's so easy to get over analyzing and rationalize yourself into trouble. So what I do is I look at the slope, I think of the bulletin, and I ask myself 3 questions. Do I have a weak layer? Do I think I can trigger it? And what's the worst that's going to happen to me if I do? And if that last question just makes me feel sick to my stomach, I don't go there. Just pull the plug, stop, come up with another plan, or gather more information until I have better confidence. Or maybe I'm not going to get that confidence because there's too much variability in the snowpack. Just pull back. There's lots of beautiful places to ski without the hazard. So when you've got snow, you've got 30 to 45 degrees slope. And by the way, 90% of all avalanche fatalities in Canada have occurred between 30 and 45 degrees where the avalanche initiated. So that's a pretty safe number. It does happen above and below, but not very often. The last ingredient is a trigger. And so once you add just enough weight, that snowpack's going to fail, shatter like a piece of glass. And so, these are the basic types of avalanches you get. And as it heats up on the rocks, basically it just destabilizes the snow right after a storm, and you can see these point releases or sloughs. And you see them all the time. I see them in the backcountry a lot. Sometimes I trigger them, and I just keep skiing them because they're relatively small, non-consequence events. There was one year I was skiing at Lake Louise, and I found a chute that hadn't been skied yet, and there's like 40 centimeters of fresh snow, and for Lake Louise, that's a gift. So I jumped in and I started skiing, and I noticed that the snow was moving the same speed I was. But I was comfortable with that speed, I didn't feel too bad, and I ended up just sort of jump turning in this pile of snow that was sliding down the gully. And at the end, when I looked up to see the tracks, hoping, to have some bragging rights and get a picture and make everyone feel bad, there was just this big swath down the gully because I had triggered the new snow and it just came down in a slough. Very often sloughs are fairly low consequence events, but not always. You can have very large sloughs. These things are actually running several hundred meters. The snowpack is more than 2 meters deep. It's because it's heavy, it's wet, it was in spring, it's a giant slushy, and that'll just tear you to shreds. So don't go out when it's hot and slushy. Also, don't go out when it's new. There's a process going on in the snow. I'm not going to go into it too much, but loose snow avalanches are a concern. But they may be a short-term concern, or you may be in terrain where they're just not a serious threat to you. Again, that's going to take some experience. Don't just go out and ski the sloughs because, I said it was okay. This is the one we're really afraid of, though. So we've got snow, we've got a slope, we had a weak layer in the snowpack, and they threw a charge. That's the trigger, and now we have an avalanche. And see how it's shattered like a pane of glass right across the mountain? That is a slab avalanche. Snow really does behave like glass. And if each layer of glass bonds to the layer below, you get a strong snowpack. It's safety glass. But when you get one of those weak layers in there, at some point the weight may exceed the strength. And all you got to do is add just that little nudge and the whole thing shatters. Just like when I was 6 years old and I threw a snowball at the big window on the front of our door and I shattered the whole thing. One little snowball. And boy did I get it. Same process. My mother taught me well. So that's what we're really worried about. They can both be dangerous, but the slabs are really much more potentially powerful. We size avalanches. I'm not going to get into this. This isn't an avalanche course or wet and dry. But we do have zones in an avalanche. That's probably worth talking about. So where the avalanche starts tends to be in 30 to 45 degree terrain. And it's where the snow basically is allowed to deposit and get deeper. We call it the start zone. Once the slide gets going, Where it maintains its speed or might even accelerate is the track. But generally it's below 30 degrees. And then where the avalanche slows down and the debris piles up, we call the run out. And if you're going to do a rescue, you're probably going to be looking for them in the run out. Not always. Sometimes the victims escape, or they've actually hit something on the way down and they're actually stuck on a rock or in a tree. That's not a joke. But those, it's not always easy to see them, but those are sort of the three zones of an avalanche: where it starts, the track where it runs, and the run out where it comes to a stop. And if an avalanche goes from top all the way to the bottom, we call that a full path avalanche. If it just, a pocket pulls out here and it runs and it stops maybe halfway down, we'll say the avalanches are running half path. So that's a little bit of terminology. And then we talk about aspect, which is where is the sun shining on the slope? That's been the easiest way for me to remember aspect. East slopes get the morning sun, south slopes get sun almost all day, west slopes get the afternoon sun, and north slopes get virtually none. This is important because it adds heat to the snowpack. And in the Rockies where I live, in the early part of the season, we need the heat to help the snow settle and get stronger. In the spring, we actually prefer the colder aspects because it allows the snow not to melt and get weaker. But aspect relates to wind and how the snow is moved over. It also relates to how much sunshine it gets. So that's good to know. Sometimes certain aspects tend to be safer, but it's not ever a hard rule because it'll depend on the wind and it depends on the sun. All right. Now, if you're going to go out in the mountains, the first thing you need to do is check the avalanche bulletin. When I started going into avalanche training, there wasn't even an avalanche bulletin in existence. I'm old. Today, it's become a really useful tool, and it's very efficient. So I'm going to let Ilya Storm. Ilya used to be the lead forecaster for Avalanche Canada, and now he's gone on to work as a ski guide. But he does a very nice job talking about the Avalanche Bulletin and what it has. Let me know if there's audio issues. I'll watch the track.
So the flagship product for Avalanche Canada in many ways is the public avalanche forecast. It gets issued daily, and it's really challenging in some ways because we're trying to do many different things. We're trying to provide a product that serves all kinds of people, and that is both people who have minimum avalanche training all the way to people who have professional level skills and experience and knowledge. We're trying to provide something that will help everybody who's going out in the mountains. And the way we do that is we break the forecast into 2 pages. Page 1, there's dates, date that it was issued, and the expiry date. It's really important to make sure that you always have the latest information. Below that, we have a headline. And the headline is a way to really help you focus on what I, as a forecaster, think is the most important thing. Below the headline, we have our danger ratings, which is a sort of a one-word summary of the hazard that's out there. And we do that for 3 elevation bands: the Alpine, the tree line, and below tree line. And then we also provide a confidence statement. So the flagship product for Avalanche...
Sorry, I hit the keyboard and it seems to have affected this. I'm just running the clip over again.
Challenging in some ways because we're trying to do many different things. We're trying to provide a product that serves all kinds of people, And that is both people who have minimum avalanche training all the way to people who have professional level skills and experience and knowledge. We're trying to provide something that will help everybody who's going out in the mountains. And the way we do that is we break the forecast into 2 pages. Page 1, there's dates, date that it was issued, and the expiry date. It's really important to make sure that you always have the latest information. Below that, we have a headline. And the headline is a way to really help you focus on what I, as a forecaster, think is the most important thing. Below the headline, we have our danger ratings, which is a sort of a one-word summary of the hazard that's out there. And we do that for 3 elevation bands, the Alpine, tree line, and below tree line. And then we also provide a confidence statement. Avalanche forecasts are built on weather forecasts, and there's uncertainty. Sometimes we get it wrong. So we try to tell you what our confidence is and why. Sometimes it's because of the forecast that just doesn't have a lot of data. We're a little data sparse. Sometimes it's because there's a lot of uncertainty about the timing or the track or the intensity of the weather. So we try to help you by revealing what our confidence is in our forecast. I think avalanche problems are a really powerful part of the forecast because in just a short word or two, persistent weak layer, persistent slab, wind slab, storm slab, those words are shorthand for a very rich concept. We provide information for what elevation band we think that this is a problem. We identify the likelihood of an occurrence, the likelihood of triggering an avalanche, as well as the size. So it's more information than a simple danger rating, but by giving you more and more detailed information, it empowers people to make better decisions. We're able to start steering people to take specific steps to help manage that risk, to help manage that problem. So that's the information that's on the front page. If you go to the second page, the forecast details page, you'll find 3 sections. The weather forecast, a summary of what the best forecast for that region. The second section there is a snowpack description. That's where we sort of dissect the snowpack, talk about layers, talk about the architecture of the snowpack, which for people with more training, more knowledge, more experience, it gives them more detailed information to better understand and assess the likely conditions that they're going to find in the field. And possibly the most important part of the forecast is the avalanche occurrence section. That's where we can really add value because if we go back to the professional exchange of information, we're able to build a picture of where avalanches are running, what kind of avalanches. My friend Jill Fredston always says that avalanches are like fish. They swim in schools. So when we can start identifying patterns of elevation, aspect, size, how far they're running, what's triggering them, we can impart that, we can communicate that, and past avalanches are one of the best ways to predict future avalanches. Yeah, really seeking to do probably one thing, and that is to help you match terrain to the conditions.
Okay. So that's a quick rundown on the bulletin. It has changed a little bit over the years, but nothing dramatic. And I really like the way Ilya says it's so much more to it than just get the number. If you use the number, it's 332. If you use the text, it's considerable in this bulletin. That only tells you very little. Why is huge, because if you understand why the problem exists, you can also understand where it may be safer and where it's more dangerous to travel. That's not something you're going to figure out in a day, but over time it becomes a really useful piece of information. because I firmly believe if you want to get out into the mountains, you should be able to go skiing or climbing or snowboarding um, anytime the hazard is low, moderate, considerable, or high. When the hazard hits extreme, I think it's time to just pull the plug because first, the weather is just horrible. But second, there's a huge amount of certainty that things are just dangerous. And if you're going to get surprised, that's the time when it's going to be worst. But there are safe places in the mountains, even when the hazard is high. And knowing what the problem is can be a tremendous asset in figuring out where to go safely. And so our one-stop shop for all this information is avalanche.ca. So we're starting to see the national parks have come up. And just to give you an idea how this works, I'm not going to give you the full rundown, but this is K Country. This is Banff, most of Banff National Park. This is Glacier National Park. And so they'll color code it. So Kananaskis is rating the hazard as considerable. Both Banff and Glacier are rating it as moderate, sort of overall. The blue pins are information. So if you want information about an area, click on the pin once you zoom in enough. And you can get information about where people have been and what they've seen. Bristol Pass, this is the individual. And you can also provide information too. Give you the snow conditions, what they saw, temperatures, how the snow was working. You can also, how do I get out of here? I don't know. I'll just start over. You can also get information about the type of event it is. So if it's blue with a white dot, that's an involvement. So somebody's triggered an avalanche. People may or may not have been injured. The black one with a red dot is a fatality. So this is the Ranger Creek avalanche in which one person died. And this information is available to you all winter long. There's also really good weather information in here. Because if you want to go, let's see, Old Goat, Three Sisters, Mount Bourgeot. Okay, so here's a weather station close to Mount Bourgeot. Probably used for the Bourgeot control team and a bit by Sunshine. And, oh, this is Sunshine. Perfect. So this is a weather station in Sunshine. If you want to go skiing or ski touring around Sunshine, this is the location. It's not up and running yet. Of course. Let's try this. Twin Cairns. Let's move. I know the one for Mount Temple. Okay. This is the Bosworth Station. Parks Canada uses it to help with their avalanche control. That affects the highway. And here we are. So it's not giving us full data, but it will give us the temperature and the wind speed and the direction. So here we are. It's about an hour out of date. So you'll get information from the last hour. This was the average wind speed. This was the direction. It's west, gusting to about 22 kilometers an hour. Relative humidity is 84%. Probably not snowing. Might be. But we're getting west winds. Not very strong, not moving a lot of snow. Temperature is basically minus 12 to minus 13. And you can see what's been going on for the last little while. And the winds were a little bit faster. They were in the zone of concern earlier in the day and yesterday. So there's great tools out there to get information. Okay. But what everyone does focus on, whoops, is this thing. Is the avalanche danger low, moderate, considerable, high, or extreme? And I'll give you a really quick rundown on that because it's something we all look at. So if the avalanche hazard is low, that doesn't mean there's no potential for avalanches. But it is possible for small avalanches on isolated features or extreme terrain. Again, from 96 to 2007, about 6 people were killed in low avalanche hazard. They were small slides, but the slides were enough that they got knocked off, basically steep features, and suffered fatal injuries. Or they were in vulnerable locations where they got buried quite deep by still a relatively small avalanche. So it's rare, but it happens. Don't turn your brain off. When the hazard is extreme, it's so simple. Avoid all avalanche terrain. Large to very large avalanches in many areas. Avalanches are certain. And so when the hazard is extreme, it's sort of the avalanche equivalent of a hurricane. We are basically in a severe weather event, and just stay out of there. It's also going to be horrible, horrible weather. The avalanche hazard's moderate. Okay. Moderate's actually, for the most part, is pretty stable, but there are areas of concern. And if you can understand where those areas are and safely avoid them, then there's still a lot of terrain you can safely enjoy. So moderate has a problem, but it's not necessarily everywhere, and there's lots of places that are still reasonably safe. So you've got to start thinking a bit more, but you've got latitude. When the avalanche hazard is high, again, we're in or just about to enter a fairly big avalanche cycle, we think, because there's always a forecast. And high suggests, natural and human triggered avalanches are very likely. Again, back off. Go to the ski hill. Go to the Canmore Nordic Center. If you're going to ski in the backcountry, pick areas that have zero avalanche exposure. Good heavy timber, nothing above the timber has a steep slope, or it's all low angle terrain, 25 degrees or less. It's pretty safe. Considerable. Considerable is the tough one, because considerable, and I love the way they describe this, small avalanches in many areas, or large avalanches in specific areas, or very large avalanches in isolated areas. Natural avalanches are possible. Human-triggered avalanches are likely. You can make a bad decision in considerable hazard and not trigger an avalanche because you got lucky. You can be very cautious in considerable hazard and feel like you're just playing it too close because nothing's going on. Well, it's because they're close, but we're not quite at the tipping point. And this is the one that's very difficult to work with. The most dangerous time to be in avalanche terrain is when the hazard's extreme. But the riskiest time to be in avalanche terrain is when the hazard is considerable. Because you know what? It could go either way. And it might be because you're really good and experienced, or it might be because you've been lucky. And it's going to take quite a few years before you'll start to realize which side of that coin you've been playing. Because someday it's going to happen. And you'll be like, okay, that is not in my comfort zone, and I just ripped out the whole slope. Thank God no one's dead. But you might get away with it, and you probably will, quite a bit. A friend of mine took an avalanche course from me, and I ran into him 3 weeks later. And he looked at me and he said, you really weren't kidding about that considerable, were you? And I said, what happened? And he said, the first weekend after that course, buddies and I went skiing in K Country. The hazard was considerable. I jumped in, I skied the line, it ripped out, I was fully buried. And he said, my buddies, they were great. They came in, they dug me out, I wasn't hurt, but that's it. We're not doing that anymore. And the other side of the coin is a fellow I used to work with. He wasn't a guide, he was in maintenance. And he would go skiing on his days off at the local hill and often just jump the fence and ski in the backcountry. And the patrollers knew it was him, but they could never prove it, and they couldn't catch him. And they would warn him, look, the hazard's considerable. And he'd be like, I know what I'm doing. I work with guides all the time, and they never get in avalanches, and I never get in avalanches. I'm fine. And he's right. He was fine for 5 years. And then one day, the avalanche was hazard. Cut the slope a little bit higher, triggered the avalanche. He managed to stay off of it, buried and killed his buddy. Be really careful. Again, from 96 to 2007, more people have died in Canada when the hazard rating was considerable than the number of fatalities and all the other danger ratings combined. It's not the most dangerous. It's the hardest one to figure out. Okay? Be careful. I can tell you right now, when I'm in the backcountry and the hazard's considerable, there's smoke coming out my ears. I'll do one of two things. I'll just say, I can't handle this anymore. I'm going to pretend it's high, and I'm going to play in a very, very safe spot. And I do that often. Or if I think I know the snowpack really well and I kind of got a handle on things, I might try and push it a little bit in considerable. But you know what? My brain is going Mach 6, and I am constantly second-guessing myself. And whenever it's just like too much of a struggle, I just step back and say, no. I don't know this well enough. Okay. Need a better mic. Is the audio still working, or are you having issues? Because this is the first time I've had this problem. Okay. So let's play with that a little, shall we? I won't keep you on much longer, but I got a little game for you. So I don't expect you to be able to figure this out, but just to give you an idea of how we can really quickly get a sense of what's going on, just want to show you something. This was given to me by somebody who bought my ebook and then said, check this out, and I got permission to add it to the book. He was skiing out the bounds at Whistler, and this is what he saw. This is the bulletin, so it's moderate, low, and low. And in the Alpine, their concern is wind slab close to the ridge line. So this is exactly where you'd be worried. And look what they did. Moderate hazard, they jumped into the one place you could expect there to be an issue. They triggered it. But to his credit, the snowboarder hangs on and manages to escape. But it took me 3 times to watch this video. That's not the real problem here. So he triggered the slide, his buddy stays above and is safe. He manages to escape to the side. Good job. But there's a solo skier down below following their up track. And I found out from the individual who gave me this, he has no transceiver, no shovel, no probe. Fortunately, the person doing the video did have a shovel and a probe. Transceiver's not going to help. He did have one, but it's not going to help because the guy Barry doesn't have a unit. And so he has to go and they found the guy, they dug him out, he wasn't hurt, but boy, was he freaked out. Okay. And I don't want to scare you. This is something I really worry about when I teach avalanche courses. You need to get out and you need to enjoy yourself. There's my son, 7 years old, touring in moderate terrain. At the age of 12, we did the Wapta Traverse. There is avalanche terrain, big avalanche terrain there. At 14, we're doing part of the Spray Range Traverse. Half that traverse is avalanche terrain. There is a time when it's reasonable and safe to go out and have fun. And believe me, my son is coming home. I'm not rolling the dice. In fact, I use him as my standard. He's now 20 and in university, but if I wouldn't let that kid go on a slope, then no one, including myself, goes on that slope. Because we're all somebody's kid, and many of us are somebody's parent. And having lost a parent fairly young, you know what? I get really angry when I hear other guys or other adults say, whoa, that was fun, but don't tell my wife. Because I'm just like, no. If you're not comfortable with your wife and your kids doing it too, we shouldn't be there. And you know what? I do ski big lines. I do ski in big aggressive places at times. But you know what? I wait until things line up. Okay, so I'm just going to give you one quick scenario. I'm not going to go over, I'll do very quickly search and rescue. But snow climber profiles now casting. Here it is. With some practice, you can get pretty good at sort of eyeballing what the avalanche danger is. And a lot of this are the skills we teach in the AST1 and reinforce at the AST2. So here we are. You're going to see an environment. I'll give you a little information, and you tell me what the hazard is. Just guess. So this is a 6-day ski traverse. The temperature actually never got above -24, but I didn't want to freak anybody out. We saw no recent avalanche activity. The snowpack collapsed on us twice, though. So no recent we didn't have much for wind. We got no new snow, and we didn't have to go through really any avalanche terrain on this tour, which was good. What do you think the hazard is? Is it low? No. It's got a weak base. It might be moderate, it might be considerable. It's definitely not high, it's definitely not extreme. And without a bulletin, without any information, just moving in the landscape, we got that. Here I am driving to the trailhead. The wind's blowing my little car around. It's snowing pretty hard for the Rockies, and it was going for a while. Okay, this wasn't forecast. It was overcast. It wasn't supposed to be windy. But it is, snowing more and pushing me around. So things have changed from what I was expecting. Hazard's definitely not low anymore. Might be, but it's unlikely to be moderate. Maybe it's considerable. Maybe it's high. It's unlikely, but if it was a really bad storm, it might be pushing us to extreme. One of the rules of thumb I use for extreme is in extreme weather, you're white knuckling at home and the helicopters don't fly. 100% of the time. This is right after a big storm. And we're skiing very low angle terrain. You can see I can barely pick up speed here because it's just 25 degrees. 40 centimeters of new snow. As you drive out, roads are closed. They're doing avalanche control. I'm getting whoops in the snowpack. Sections of the road are closed because they're doing avalanche control. What do you think the hazard is? Is it low? No way. Is it moderate? No way. It might be considerable. It's probably high. It's not extreme. Maybe during the storm it got to extreme, but now things are getting any worse. And like I said, I've just picked such easy terrain. We're just skiing down our up tracks. Here's another example. So we're moving across on the Wapta Traverse. We've seen no evidence after several days of recent slab avalanches. Cornice and icefall has produced no slab avalanches. So we've done some tests. We're not finding any weak layers. Temperatures are getting up to 0 during the day on the sunny slopes, but at night it's freezing nightly. We've left very early. We'll be over all the concern before 11 a.m. And we're on primarily the shaded slopes. So is the hazard low? Yeah, maybe. Is the hazard moderate? Yeah, maybe. It's unlikely to be considerable. It's definitely not high or extreme. So without further information, it's leaning like, yeah, we should go. Conditions are good. Because it's big terrain and it has consequences. Okay, so there's a game. I won't keep you much longer, but I should probably just go over search and rescue really quickly. Because everyone seems keen on that. I'm actually not. I'm not a big search and rescue fan. I'm a big fan of not needing it. Don't get caught. Because search and rescue is like training for first aid, or getting your first aid ticket instead of your driver's license when you drive. Just drive well enough that you don't have a crash. But if you really want to be smart, have both. Okay, so you know what? All the transceivers are good. Every one of them out there. Just get a good 3 antenna beacon. The one on the right, yes, it has been recalled, but the version that's replaced it is basically just a different switch. So take it in for a recall. The electronics were fine. So I actually took my old rusty beacon and I used it last year because I was working with Avalanche Search and Rescue, training people to become search and rescue technicians. And everybody had the latest and greatest beacon, and I had my old one. And I was wondering if it was any good. And I thought, well, let's find out. So at the end of the exam, they all had to go through a fairly intense search exam. And when they were finished, everyone was out of sight, so they couldn't see me screw up if it didn't work. I took my ancient old transceiver, still a 3 antenna, turned it on, and just used the simplest search function it has. And you know what? I aced that exam. So all the 3 antenna beacons are good, so long as it's in good repair and it hasn't been recalled. Choose the one that works for you. I have gone out and bought the latest and greatest, but only because when I teach these courses, I need to be very proficient with it because 90% of the industry uses it. Recreationally, I am totally happy. I love this middle beacon. It's total antique now, but it was a 3 antenna beacon, and I guided with it, and I could pass any exam they threw at me. Okay, I'm not going to go over a search or anomalies. Shovels are kind of big. Get a good shovel. We've had lots of improvements in survival now with Avalanche Rescue. Those improvements, I'll tell you what beacon I had in a second. Those improvements in the shovel have been the techniques and using better shovels. And that has taken our burial time and cut it in more by almost 2/3. It used to be if you were buried 2 meters deep, it would take about 30 minutes to dig you out. You're probably dead. Now, with the new digging techniques, they are getting 2-meter burials out in 12 minutes. There's a real increase in the survival rates of deep burials, not because of the beacons, because of the shovels. Now there is a standard for shovels, but they keep saying it's coming out next year, it's coming out next year. So I'm losing faith in these guys. There was an independent Swiss test done like 15 years ago. Most of the shovels they tested aren't even on the market anymore. But the only two that passed are still available. And that is the Voile TelePro and the G3 Avitech. That's the only time I will make a product endorsement. Those are really good shovels. And they're still tougher than anything out there. And they're still made, and they're two of the cheapest shovels you can buy. My family carries Voile TelePros. I carry the one in the middle because I have to do a lot of digging. I like the home function. It doesn't help you in rescue, it helps you with work. And I carried this shovel and the Voile TelePro for a year and a half because I wasn't sure about this shovel until finally I found out what it took to break it. And when I saw just how much abuse I had to give it, I had a lot more confidence in the shovel. So I like it. It's not available anymore, but I've basically stockpiled a bunch of old ones. So I think I've got another 5 years of shovels worth here. For beacons, I have had the Tracker 2, worked fine for me. I have used the Peeps and the Black Diamond. They're the same transceiver. The simpler one, I think it's called the Patroller, and they've worked fine for me. But like I said, there was a recall issue. Make sure you're not using one of those old ones that have been recalled. I still use the Black Diamond, and I bought the Mammut S, which is the professional grade unit, and it is pretty amazing. It allows me to switch back. But what's really interesting is its most sophisticated search function on the S is full analog, which no one is trained to because we stopped building analogs 30 years ago. However, I'm old, and so I used a straight analog up until about 24 years ago. And I still remember how to use it. And so when I switch over to their advanced system, it works really well for me. But you know what? You don't need it. We have built transceivers to the point that at the recreational level, you're not going to get hosed with any of them. Okay, moving on very quickly. Conveyor shoveling. This has changed a little bit, but it is very close to what I'm showing you now. And actually, I'll let Jordy tell it.
Straight line downhill of the probe, putting the lead shoveler with their shoulder touching the probe, turn sideways to the slope, and then the next person down slope will be spaced out by an extended shovel handle. So you're moving snow from your area of responsibility, about a 1 meter cross section. You're trying to shovel down as much as you can. Initially you're shoveling down, everybody is in their area, with moving the snow to the side. And once you get down about a shovel blade deep, then you're moving snow from your area of responsibility backwards only as far as the next person, and it becomes a kind of a bucket brigade or a conveyor belt of snow. So we get a nice ramp effect that's coming down the probe. So the bulk of the shoveling down is happening near the front, and as you get towards the back of your ramp, it tapers into a nice low-grade angle for extricating your subject once you get to them. You are going to get tired quite quickly. The first scenario is that you have about the right number of shovelers, or possibly not quite enough shovelers for the burial depth that you're dealing with and the slope that you're on. And so in that case, you've lined up, you start shoveling. The first person or the second person can call the rotation. When a rotation is called, you call rotate or switch, and now the first person is going to move out to the back of the shoveling line, and the second person in line is going to move into the first position and keep digging down the probe. And so you'll carry on with those rotations until you get additional shoveling resources hopefully showing up. The second strike team rotation method is if you have an additional shoveler, they can actually get a rest and become a shovel master, and they'll rest for a rotation cycle. So the shovel master will stand there with a shovel in hand. After 2 to 3 minutes, they will call a switch, a rotation, and they will move to the front position, and everybody will move backwards. So the lead shoveler now moves back to position 2. The last shoveler will come up and become the shovel master. And the shovel master has inserted themselves at the front of the shoveling line. The third rotation in strike team shoveling is if you have additional shovelers besides your shovelers in a line, and in addition to the shovel master, consider having a static shovel master who will only be directing operations. And now they will direct additional shovelers that are standing beside and resting. As soon as the lead shoveler starts slowing down, they will direct them into the front position. And again, just like rotation number 2 style, you will move everyone backwards 1 position, and now the back person will spit out of the line and come stand in the line of additional shovelers. So for calculating the number of shovelers that is optimal.
Okay, so I'm not going to get into this too much, but that's basically the technique we use for digging now. Straight line, one behind the other, and you basically start right at the probe. We used to have them 2 by 2, side by side, digging from a distance and digging in towards. This new technique is faster. In fact, the deepest live burial in Canada is almost 4 meters deep. And they dug them out in half an hour until they were able to clear the airway. That's an extraordinarily fast process, and that was using the new technique. It also allows you to rotate people through and let people have rests if you've got enough in the group. There is one significant change. I apologize, but we don't have the snow. I'm going to be in a backcountry lodge in a couple weeks, and I'll get footage of this, which I'm happy to share. Essentially, the new digging technique is some minor variations to that. So if you take a course and people are saying something slightly different, by all means. If they're digging 2 people side by side and away from the probe, tell them we've changed the system and they need to update, because it's out there still quite a bit. But if you have someone buried less than 1 meter deep, we don't do that. What we do now is, once you get a strike with the probe, just take a step back and you have 2 people, sort of one on each side of the probe, digging straight down. That's all you need. If you've got more people, yeah, they can be behind the 2, helping to move some of the snow away. But really just 2 people right there digging straight down will create a nice wall and reach the victim very fast and make for a quick extrication, because you've built a really large feature that you can then find the orientation of the victim and get to their head quickly. So that's what we've changed with digging. I'm not going to go on to too much more because I know it's been an hour of listening to me. Oh, more. Sorry. But I'll finish with one last thing. People are always asking about airbags. And airbags work. There's no question. But they are not a silver bullet. You'll see in this video, I'll show Pascal Hagley, who's doing research at Simon Fraser University, and is pretty much the lead researcher in Canada for Avalanche snow science, Avalanche research. And what he found, in a nutshell, is that they did an international study so they could get a larger group set. They found that individuals who were buried in avalanches, where individuals had beacon, probe, and shovel, and individuals had beacon, probe, shovel, and airbags in the same event and were in similar positions, they compared their survival rates. And at the end of the day, if you get buried in an avalanche with a beacon, probe, and shovel, there's about an 80% chance of survival. If you have a beacon, probe, shovel, and an airbag, you have a 90% chance of survival worldwide. However, airbags, so they reduce the fatality rate, they cut the fatality rate in half, but they increase the survival rate by about 12%. So it depends on which way you look at it. The other thing is, there's no direct evidence that avalanche airbags reduce trauma. There's no clinical evidence. There's anecdotal evidence, but when you run the numbers, we don't see a statistical increase or decrease in people wearing airbags having more or less trauma than somebody who didn't have it. And as I said, anecdotally there is. I know a colleague who was caught in a very small slough, but it pushed him off a cliff. And before he went off the cliff, he pulled his airbag. It inflated, had a collar around his head. He hit below the cliff band, which had rocks, and he landed on his head. He fractured his skull. Fortunately, the level of damage was such that after about 6 or 7 months, he was pretty much back to normal. However, had he been wearing a helmet, and it was the first day that winter he didn't have one, he probably would have walked away. So the airbag very likely absorbed a huge amount of the energy and probably made the difference between life and death. A helmet, he very likely would have just walked out of that and not suffered any injuries. So they are useful, they are effective, and they're becoming more sophisticated. So they have multi-use in a single trip. They're more durable in cold weather because some of the electric ones had issues. That's not really a problem anymore. And the gas cartridges work great for a single use, but they don't work for multiple use while you're still out there. And frankly, if I get caught in an avalanche where I'm pulling my airbag, I'm not likely to be going into the same kind of terrain that same day. So that never struck me as a particularly strong argument. They're very useful. If I went back into mechanized skiing, I'd probably buy one. I do a lot of touring, and I would buy one, except my pack, the gear I have to carry as a guide, basically exceeds the size that airbag packs have. So they've yet to make an airbag pack big enough for backcountry guiding, and they're definitely too small for multi-day. So that's the limitation with them, but they are an effective tool. Okay, so thanks guys. I'm not going to keep you up too much longer because how long do you want to listen to me? But thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, by all means, drop me a note. I'll send you my email here. And if you're looking to get involved with courses, by all means, get in touch with the Alpine Club of Canada. And my best advice to you is whenever you're into a situation where you have to make a decision that has consequences, talk it over as a group. I've been doing that since about 2015 when I worked at Purcell. I started talking to my guests. I tell them, this is where we're going, this is the hazard, and why I think we should go here or there. And it was really useful for me because it forced me to have a logical explanation for my decisions, which was good. And I didn't expect my guests to understand everything, but I welcomed their questions because it forced me to have a good grounding. Because as soon as I start saying, well, I don't know, or, well, that's how we do it, it's pretty clear I don't know. And I'm not providing, I don't have enough of the information I'm looking for. And in my career as a guide, the only times I've gotten into real trouble was when I was not being listened to and I was getting pushed into something I wasn't comfortable with, but I kept my mouth shut because I wanted to keep my job, or I didn't want to make waves. And I got buried up to my neck once because of that. And my boss came down and said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea that was going to happen." And my only answer to him was, "What? You didn't hear me whining for the last 5 minutes that I don't want to do this?" And after that moment, I finally came to the conclusion that, you know what? You can fire me. I'm not going into these places anymore. So I always go with the attitude that if I'm really freaked out, fire me. I don't care. I'm coming home. And I give my guests that same veto power. If somebody really doesn't want to do something, we don't do it. And I don't make a deal about it. Since 2015, that's happened to me twice. And in both cases, they had really good reasons for it. So, you know what? If you're not being heard, you're in trouble. So thanks, guys. I'll stick around for another minute if you have any questions. Otherwise, take care. And I think I've got another one next week on trip planning. And then we've got one coming up. Is it? No. Oh, and then one in December on glacier travel and crevasse rescue. That one's very nerdy. Raquel. Nice name. My wife is Rachel. Okay. All right, thanks guys. I'm gonna pull the plug then. Have a good evening and thanks for tuning in.